Today, I'd like to bring you a guest viewpoint about these United States. I think you'll find my daughter, Maureen Reagan, a provocative commentator. She'll be right with you.
I was lucky enough to grow up when the American flag carried in a parade inspired a feeling of national pride. It brought a tear to the eye and an increase in your heartbeat. In a few short years, I've seen that same flag ridiculed, violated, torn to shreds, and burned. If the avalanche of discontent continues, if the idea that nationalism is somehow immoral grows, those wondrous, awesome, goose-pimply feelings will have died an ignominious death. Why and how has ugly apathy spread in this country? A great country, a beautiful country, a nation trying desperately to live in peace, and yet a nation and a people willing and able to defeat any foe at any time, anywhere the freedom of human endeavor was threatened. When did America become fat and pompous, complacent and sniveling? When did America lose its youth and vitality and become crotchety and senile? Is it, as some say, time for a new American dream? Is the old dream of individual accomplishment outmoded? Have we progressed so far the idea that we cannot be free while others live in chains no longer matters to Americans? Every generation has had to renew the battle to preserve freedom. Are we committed, or are we intimidated by vociferous spoilers who would give away our inheritance rather than fight? Is America now a populous state where we envy those who have more while hating those who have less? Our origins are an overall freedom of opportunity, the opportunity to speak, to worship, to strive for, and to achieve whatever our talents and ambitions allow. It's difficult to express the anxiety, the outright fear I feel for the future of this republic, the frustration at seeing such an immense problem without being able to present a solution. Does anybody want to listen, or is the lack of simple answers an excuse for inactivity? Are we a nation founded on a belief in freedom for all people? Haven't our struggles, internal and external, been based on that concept? If not, then what we've been doing these last 199 years is history's biggest ripoff. A lack of political leadership has led the world to distrust our promises, and a casual observer can only conclude that our grand experiment has been a selfish pursuit of material reward only for us, and we've been buying off the rest of the world to allow it. For those of us who believe there is still a chance to salvage our principles and our pride, we may be scattered, but we can raise our voices like stones from a sling against this Goliath of greed and hopelessness. Ask yourself, what if David had never tried? This is Maureen Reagan. Thank you for listening.
My guest commentator, my daughter Maureen Reagan, is back with me today for her viewpoint on the issue of personal privacy in America. She'll be right with you.
Every year, activists at opposite ends of the political spectrum find themselves in greater agreement. Or perhaps that means the ends are becoming more extreme, thus enlarging the middle ground of political thought. Legislation designed to safeguard every American's right to privacy finds among its supporters a patchwork of political design. For instance, R.E.A. Nyer, the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union, has written a book called Dossier: The Secret Files They Keep on You. The introduction is entitled The Dossier Mongers. In the book, he deals with such topics as law enforcement, political dossiers, credit bureaus, mental hospital records. In stating the problem, I can find little disagreement with the idea that many facts about all of us are too widely known and held in computer banks over which we have no control. Mr. Nyer and I further agree that controls of public information are desirable and necessary. In fact, many of his suggestions were proposed in a privacy protection bill co-sponsored by Congressman Barry Goldwater, Jr. The part of all this which amuses me is that 10 years ago, when conservatives were begging for control of the runaway computer era, we could never have used the title, The Secret Files They Keep on You. We were constantly attacked for seeing a conspiracy under every lamppost, and our cries against the increasing control of big government were treated like the paranoid utterances of deranged fearmongers. It's delightful to welcome our friends on the left to the battle for personal privacy and less government, though it may be a little late. This year, the United States Supreme Court handed down a ruling which will allow the Internal Revenue Service to examine any bank records at any time without having to show just cause. The privacy of our records is no longer protected from this government agency. They don't have to explain to anyone what they're looking for. They can just look. The autonomy of such a government agency has to be the biggest single threat to democracy in our history. But that's not bad enough. Having to dig for this information, which the media obviously feels is unimportant, does not alter the danger that within 1 week of that Supreme Court decision, the head of the U.S. Passport Department, a bureaucrat who's been allowed to remain in that position beyond the statutory age of retirement, was quoted as favoring a citizen identification card. Why? Well, to protect us, of course. A citizen ID would aid law enforcement. It would make record-keeping easier. It would put an end to the employment of illegal aliens. Whether you consider yourself to be a liberal, a moderate, or a conservative, think about these latest invasions of your privacy. And remember, it's only 9 years till 1984. I'm Maureen Reagan. Thank you for listening.
Malpractice insurance is an issue which can affect everyone. Today, my daughter Maureen Reagan is back with her viewpoint. She'll be right with you.
All across the country, doctors are faced with prohibitive increases in malpractice insurance premiums, and patients are faced with the lack of medical service, while hospitals stare at imminent bankruptcy. The doctors blame the insurance companies for increasing the cost of their coverage by thousands of dollars a year. The insurance companies blame the legal profession for gigantic court awards in malpractice litigation. To complete the circle, the attorneys insist they shouldn't even be included in this discussion. The real villain, they say, is the medical profession for failing to police its own members. Those who should be complaining are too confused to know where to place the blame. The patients, all of us who depend upon medical expertise for our various ailments and, when necessary, to save our lives. In trying to see the whole picture, it seems to me there are areas in which all of the principles could be more responsive to each other and the public's needs. So while legislatures in every state debate legislation and watch the example of the plan just passed in Indiana, I have a few suggestions to put forth for consideration. Why can't there be a medical review board in each state which could establish guidelines for the keeping of medical records and patient consent forms, thus providing better protection for the patients and the doctors? Such a board could be empowered to discipline doctors who have displayed a degree of negligence detrimental to their public trust. And my second thought is that only a handful of insurance companies deal in malpractice insurance. What if state governments were to offer a series of tax credits to other insurance companies as an incentive to share the burden of this type of policy which is so vital to the public welfare? In the Indiana plan, one of the important provisions is a ceiling on legal contingency fees at 15% in malpractice litigation. Contingency fees are necessary because most of us could not afford thousands of dollars in legal fees in advance of a lawsuit. So we get the necessary legal assistance by paying a percentage of the award by a court. However, we now see most attorneys charging 50% contingency fees plus court costs, and this leaves the victim with the short end of the awarded amount of money. Indiana's proposed 15% fee seems a little low. How about 25% plus costs? And perhaps the legal profession could volunteer such standards. The Indiana plan also provides for a commission which hears claims to decide if they should go to court. I would suggest enlarging that to a voluntary arbitration board as an alternative for cases involving small claims or where settlement is more desirable than court delays. The important aspect of my thinking is the hope that government action can be averted. The Indiana plan provides for minimum and maximum malpractice coverage, with the taxpayer assuming any award over that amount. If the professions can find ways to handle their problems, then most legislation wouldn't be necessary, and the government wouldn't have to become more involved in health care. Abraham Lincoln said that government should do for the people only those things they cannot do so well for themselves. Perhaps the specter of government action will induce the necessary reforms which we need to assure the health and safety of all our citizens. I'm Maureen Reagan, and thank you for listening.